On January 6th, 2021, hordes of insurrectionists attacked our nation's capital, shaking our sense of security in our democracy to its core. The conspiracy-abiding, flagpole-wielding criminals assaulted police officers, indiscriminately inflicted damage to hollowed architecture, aided and abetted by leaders who slunk back to political safety and actually defended these acts of domestic terrorism. Democracy, we all learned that day, is not necessarily self-reinforcing. Our society's better angels require leaders to reinforce our values and to protect our communities. And communities like ours need to highlight that leadership, for recognition of valued public service can be the spark to further advance justice. In the wake of the attack on our security and on our democracy, ADL stood up and launched the Protect Plan to counter domestic terrorism while preserving civil liberties. We encouraged policymakers to take on the extremist scourge that threatens our communities, and yet at the same time, we implored our leaders to embrace restraint because we can't become that which we condemn. We cannot allow ourselves to overly empower the executive branch at the expense of our core values. Doing so would hand the extremists a victory. That careful balance of securing our communities while defending our values requires the urgency of strong, careful leadership among our nation's policymakers. 4 members of Congress have answered that call, and I am so delighted that we have an opportunity to celebrate them here today. The Distinguished Public Service Award is the highest award that ADL bestows on policymakers. Its recipients are recognized for demonstrating a sensitivity to the needs of our community and society writ large. On a quest for freedom and justice, they have been humanitarians who've taken concrete action to create peace and to advance the public good. So today I am humbled and thrilled that we are able to recognize Senator Gary Peters, Senator Rob Portman, Congressman John Katko, and Congressman Benny Thompson, 4 leaders who have worked tirelessly to secure our communities, and yet they have done so while retaining our highest values in their hearts. Senators, congressmen, by illuminating the domestic terrorism threat, supporting efforts to counter and prevent further terrorism, and working to create resources to secure Jewish institutions and other faith-based organizations, all of us are safer and stronger under your leadership. And in your targeted approach that so ably weaves adherence to civil liberties throughout these security measures, our society is more secure and our values remain intact. So thank you on behalf of everyone at ADL. We all know we need leaders like you. And so today, again, it is just a delight to celebrate your leadership. And so with that, it's my honor to present you with the ADL Distinguished Public Service Award.
Hi, I'm U.S. Senator Rob Portman. I want to thank the Anti-Defamation League and Jonathan Greenblatt for presenting me with the Distinguished Public Service Award alongside my friend, Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. I'm honored by it. I wish I could be with you tonight at your National Leadership Summit, but know that I'm with you in spirit. As you know, the abhorrent violence against communities of faith, especially anti-Semitic attacks, are reaching the highest levels on record, as your annual audit released this week indicates. The threats and senseless attacks we've seen against religious communities are attacks on our values and must be condemned. We need to do more than that, though, and that's why I've worked with the ADL to give faith-based institutions across our country the resources and information they need to protect themselves including information on applying for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. I'm proud that the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which I helped authorize and increase funding for, has improved efforts to keep at-risk nonprofit and faith-based organizations, such as synagogues or community centers across the country, safe by promoting emergency preparedness, coordination, and collaboration between public and private community representatives, as well as state and local governmental agencies. I particularly appreciate what the Anti-Defamation League has done working with me and Senator Maggie Hassan from New Hampshire to pass the bipartisan Pray Safe Act. This legislation, which has now passed the United States Senate, will establish a federal clearinghouse through which faith-based organizations and houses of worship can access information on safety and security best practices, available federal grant programs, and training opportunities. I urge my colleagues in the House to pass this legislation as soon as possible. We've got to ensure that faith-based organizations and houses of worship across the country have the resources, assistance, and training they need to secure their facilities as they continue to face these significant threats of lethal violence and acts of terror. The work of ADL is crucial in our fight to combat anti-Semitic threats and violence across the country, and I'm proud to partner with you in that effort. Thanks again for this high honor, and Godspeed in your important mission.
Hello, I'm U.S. Senator Gary Peters, and thank you to Jonathan Greenblatt, Ben Sachs, and all the members of the ADL for your efforts to prevent and fight back against acts of hate. I'm grateful and humbled for the honor to receive your 2022 Distinguished Public Service Award. As each and every one of you know, our nation continues to witness an alarming and unacceptable rise in racially and religiously motivated violence. From the recent and horrific attack against a Jewish congregation in Colleyville, Texas, to continued acts of hate directed at communities of color. We have all seen how these acts of violence have destroyed sacred property and left deep, traumatic scars on entire communities in my home state of Michigan and all across our country. Too many Americans, including the Jewish community, fear that they will face violence and hate just because of who they are or where they worship. For example, a recent audit by the ADL showed that incidents of anti-Semitism reached an all-time high in 2021, and that is simply unacceptable. Every American should feel safe where they live, where they work, and where they pray. And that is why, as chairman of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, I have worked to combat what our national security agencies say is the most lethal threat to our nation: domestic terrorism driven by white supremacist and anti-government extremism. As a part of recent government funding legislation, I helped secure $250 million for the Department of Homeland Security's Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which provides funding to houses of worship and other nonprofit organizations that want to secure their facilities against potential terrorist attacks. For years, I have been a proud champion of this critical program, and I'm going to continue my efforts to ensure that it receives appropriate funding. This program is an important step to helping ensure that synagogues, churches, mosques, and other houses of worship can remain a safe haven. But these resources alone will not stamp out the hatred and intolerance that fuels domestic terrorist attacks. And I'm grateful to the ADL for tracking and shedding a light on acts of domestic extremism, and I continue to pressing the federal government to improve how they track and publicly report these incidents and utilize the data to effectively allocate resources and personnel so we can protect our communities. Combating this growing threat will also require strong action to support the amplification of extreme and dangerous content through online platforms. That is why I've continued to press social media companies about their role in the amplification of misinformation, disinformation, and terrorist content. As we all know, the spread of this rhetoric online can translate into real-world violence that presents a serious national security threat. Each of us has a moral obligation to speak out and to defend every American against intolerance, violent extremism, and hate. And I look forward to continuing to work with all of you to combat violence motivated by hate. Thank you again for this tremendous honor.
Good afternoon. I'm Congressman John Katko, ranking member of the House Committee on Homeland Security. I'd like to thank Jonathan Greenblatt and the Anti-Defamation League for the invitation to speak to you all today. I'm deeply honored to be one of the recipients of this year's Distinguished Public Service Award. In addition to being a global leader in exposing extremism, I applaud ADL for their critical work on anti-bias education and combating hate online. The terrifying hostage situation at Congregation Beth Israel in Texas earlier this year exemplifies a troubling threat landscape facing the homeland. While faith-based communities across the country encounter varying levels of discrimination, the American Jewish community continues to face a persistent threat of violence. This is a threat that stems from a variety of ideological motivations, and one which has plagued our society for centuries. At the beginning of February, Jonathan joined our committee for a hearing on a current terror landscape. During that hearing, he shared that ADL has recorded a 60% increase in anti-Semitic incidents over the past 5 years. 60% is a shocking and deeply troubling number. In addition to the growing anti-Semitic threat, over the past decade and a half, we have seen a resurgence in anti-government militia movements. All of this domestic extremism is, of course, fueled by the perpetuation of hate throughout various online forums. As policy advocates, legislators, and Americans, these dynamics make for a challenging environment. One of the most important resources available to address this concerning threat landscape is FEMA's nonprofit National Security Grant Program. This competitive grant program provides funding support for target hardening and other security-related activities to nonprofit organizations, including our houses of worship that are at a high risk of terrorist attack. Given the vital mission of this program, I've worked hard to ensure that the Nonprofit Security Grant Program has the resources it needs to reach at-risk institutions. Earlier this year, I was proud to introduce the Nonprofit Security Grant Program Improvement Act with my friend and colleague, Homeland Security Chairman Benny Thompson. This legislation would expand and strengthen the Nonprofit Security Grant Program to help enhance security and protect Americans and our faith communities from terrorism and hate crimes. The work done by the Department of Homeland Security, law enforcement officials, and nonprofit organizations like ADL to combat extremists of every stripe is imperative to securing the homeland. Throughout my career, I have been a strong advocate of the Jewish faith community, and rest assured I will continue to do so. Thank you again to Jonathan and ADL for inviting me here today, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of this event. May God bless you all.
In light of his responsibilities as chairman of the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol and chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Congressman Thompson was unable to attend today's summit to receive his award. In his absence, we celebrate his commitment to protecting our democracy and his years of public service.